Welcome. In this DDI CAD cast, we'll cover 3D via Composer, V6R 2013, what's new. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to be going over the new features for the V6R 2013 release. But before I actually get into the software, I'd like to take a moment just to show you what I'm going to be covering. So here's a list of the new features for a 3D via V6R 2013 release. And probably the biggest is the Image Library Workshop. Now, the Image Library Workshop gives me a nice interface for adding images to my views in 3D via Composer. They've also added new functionality for aligning magnetic lines, as well as some updates to the Rights Manager, added some new advanced application settings, as well as some new default document options. Now, without further ado, I'd like to jump right into the software and show you this new Image Library Workshop. So jumping into 3D via Composer, like I mentioned, it is a workshop that they've added. Okay, it's an Image Library Workshop, and just like the name implies, it's a library of images that you can use to drag and drop into views in 3D via Composer. So it is a workshop, so it is on the Workshops tab. You'll see on the Workshops tab this Image Library icon, and if I select that icon, on the right hand side the workshop pops out, much like all the other workshops in 3D via Composer. And you'll see in this particular image library have just a standard set of icons that you'd expect to see in product documentation, inspection, unscrew, screw, forbidden warning, those kinds of things. Standard icons you'd expect to see in 3D via Composer. And to use the Image Library Workshop, it's just a matter of dragging and dropping from the workshop onto the view you want to apply that to. So I want to find a view. I'm going to go ahead and move to this Remove Jaws view, and I want to show an unscrew image in this particular view. So what I'm going to do is go back to my Image Library Workshop, find the unscrew image, and just drag and drop it onto my view. Okay? And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now, of course, these are actors, so they have properties, so I can set things like leaders, okay, and attach it to geometry. Okay. I can also do things like set the opacity, the color, all those things. The things you come to expect with 3D via Composer and any actor in 3D via Composer, really. Okay, so of course, I can come in and adjust a lot of my settings for background color. All the properties you see here are used to on the left-hand side for any particular actor. Now, the question I often had when this new functionality came out is, that's nice, but can I incorporate my own image? Can I create my own library of images to use with this new Image Library Workshop? And you can. It does support that functionality. You'll see the path listed here. There's a Browse button there where you can browse to any folder on your computer and point to any list or any folder full of images. So here I've added a folder on my desktop called Pictures, and I've added a series of company logos. But you'll see it's really just a folder full of images. So any folder full of images can be used in the Image Library Workshop. So maybe I want to add a company logo. Okay? All I have to do is drag and drop from the Image Library Workshop onto my view. Okay. So again, the Image Library Workshop supports the ability for the user to go out and to find their own folders full of images to work with. So the next bit of functionality I'd like to go over is the Align Magnetic Lines functionality. And the magnetic lines have been around in 3D via Composer for quite a while now. In fact, they're now in SOLIDWORKS. And what I'd like to show you is this new Align functionality to it. So what I have here is a standard bill of materials view, an exploded view in 3D via Composer. And I'm just going to create a couple of callouts. Now, if you haven't used the Align Magnetic, or the Magnetic Line functionality, it's solely to align annotations, balloons, whatever actors you want to align. It's right here on the Author tab, and you just simply sketch a line that you want all the actors to snap to. Okay, so I sketch this line. You'll see they kind of snap to it at first, and then any that don't, all I have to do is drag and drop, kind of like so, onto that magnetic line. Okay. Notice that as I drag the callouts over the magnetic line, they automatically snap to it. Now, the magnetic line command is not new. In fact, it's been around for quite some time. What I'd like to explain is this new option for aligning the magnetic line. Now, if you look underneath the magnetic line options, underneath the magnetic line command, you'll see the align magnetic line command. Notice though it's grayed out right now. The reason for that is because the magnetic line is not highlighted. So if I go into the actual view, highlight the magnetic line, you'll see the option for align magnetic line. Now I can also select this command from the actual view itself. So if you click on the magnetic line, you'll see a small icon in the center of the magnetic line. It's the same command, the align magnetic line command. So by selecting it from here, I can also call up the command. Now the way this command works is you select the command and then you select an axis that you want to align the magnetic line to. So you notice the moment I select the command, it says pick axis. And as you start to mouse over geometry within the view, it'll give you different options for things to align to. Okay, so I can align to different edges. You'll see here as I mouse over geometry, it wants to align itself to it. And so all it is a matter of finding the edge on the geometry you want to align things to and then clicking on it. Okay, so here's an edge on this jaw, and if I actually select that edge on the jaw, it'll realign the magnetic line to be parallel with that edge. Okay, so it's just simply a tool to align your magnetic line with some edge of your part. And you'll see there as I snap to, it snaps to that edge of the jaw. Okay, giving me a parallel line with whatever edge you happen to select. So that's the new align magnetic line command in 3D Via Composer. The next thing I'd like to go over is the updates to the rights manager. And if you haven't used the rights manager, it's really just a way for the user to limit how much the end user, the person viewing all this stuff that you're creating, how much permissions they have, how much control they have over this particular file. Okay, so when I'm creating content, whether it be animations or whatever it may be, when you're publishing this content, you have a set of permissions you give to whatever user you are giving access to view those files. And they are under the document properties under Right Manager. So if I go to Document Property Right Manager, you'll see a new option that says Forbid Delete Actor. And this new right allows me to forbid the end user, the person viewing my content, from deleting any actors that are within the content, within the actual file, okay, the published file. And of course we're talking about the viewers using 3D Via Composer Player. Okay. The other thing I want to note is this delete actor applies to not only collaborative but geometry actors, so both in this situation. Okay. So what I'd like to do is show you how this behaves without this option on, and then show you what it means to turn this option on and then publish your content. So of course I'm talking about publishing content. I'm talking about the end user that's using this stuff I'm creating in Composer. So I'm going to publish this just to show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and publish an HTML. And we'll go ahead and open it up. And what I'd like to show you is with the Composer player, which is what I'm looking at here, is just the player for 3D Via Composer, the user actually has the ability to delete actors. And what I mean by that is they can go into the graphics window, rotate, zoom, just like all the things you've seen in 3D Via Composer, but they could actually go in and start deleting actors to see what's underneath them. So as I rotate, zoom, and I select an actor and hit the delete key, it actually removes it from the display, allowing me to see what's underneath it. Okay? Now this may not be the kind of functionality I'm looking for. So you see as I delete these two actors, I can essentially see all the internal components of this particular assembly. Okay? So it gives me a lot more control. I can see a lot more of the assembly when I can delete the actors and really start to look down into maybe hidden components within the assembly. So if I don't want to allow this kind of functionality, if I don't want the end user to be able to delete actors from my assembly, I need to limit that. I'm going to show you how. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I want to republish that HTML with the option Forbid Deleting Actors. Okay, so I'm going to go into my document properties. And under the Right Manager, I'm going to check the option Forbid Delete Actors. Okay, which of course doesn't allow the user to delete the actors. So again, I'm going to publish it. Publish the same HTML, and again I'm going to open it up. And now what you'll notice the moment I get this to load is that I am no longer able to delete an actor. And the big thing here is once you select something and hit the delete key, it just simply doesn't work. There's no command, there's no errors, it just simply doesn't do anything. Okay? So again, this is if I don't want to show the end user what's inside my assembly. I can block their ability to delete the actors, therefore they can only see what's on the outside. Okay, it just gives me a little bit more control over how the end user sees the data. So the next thing I'd like to go over are these new advanced application settings for 3D Via Composer. So if I go to the File, Preferences menu, at the very bottom here you'll see Advanced Settings. Now these advanced settings have been here for a while, but I'd like to point out a few of the new settings for the V6R 2013 release. Now there are a lot of different settings here, and it's worth mentioning that not everybody will want to adjust any of these settings. These are definitely for the more advanced 3D Via Composer user, and they don't necessarily apply to everybody. With that being said, there are a few use cases for adjusting these settings. I'd like to go over a couple. The first I'd like to go over is this Advanced Curve Detection option. And this allows me to get a little bit more precise measurements out of my radius dimensions than I would otherwise get. Okay, so if I ever run into issues with the precision of my radius dimensions, I could come in here and enable this option, which would give me a little bit more control, a little bit more precision. Now I really only think this applies to really heavily tessellated CAD data though. It doesn't necessarily apply to everything. The next thing I'd like to go over is the VRML export options. We have some new export options for the VRML file extension type, namely the ability to export the names as well as export as zips, WRLs. Okay, so again, specific to the VRML extension. So if I scroll down here, I want to go over one more, and it has to do with geometry. Okay, you'll see here geometry and an option for merge keep draws. And what this is it affects the performance of merged actors. So if you do a lot of merging of actors in 3D Via Composer, you want to check this option to increase the performance of it. It's worth noting though that it doesn't really affect the overall performance or anything you see in the interface. It's more of a background thing in 3D Via Composer. Now, it's worth bringing up now the release notes for this V6R 2013 release. And the reason I bring up the release notes is I feel it's important just because it goes into a lot greater detail about what I'm covering here today than I have time to. So if I go into the release notes, I brought up the page I'm referring to in the application preferences. And I can set all these options. You see here it's highlighting everything that's brand new for the 2013 release. And if I scroll up just a bit, it'll give me a breakdown of what all these options actually mean. So if you're looking for a little bit more detailed explanation on some of these advanced settings, I highly recommend you check out the release notes. Now the release notes are stored under the install directory for Composer. So in your program files for Composer, you'll see a folder called Docs and then a PDF called Release Notes. Now the next thing I'd like to get into are some of the document property options, and more importantly the way to control them. So this next bit is definitely for the administrators listening and not necessarily the users. So as an administrator, if you want to be able to control the document properties, there hasn't been much for you to do, much that you can do to control how the properties are set in Composer. With the 2013 release you can now control these. What I'm referring to are the default and the document properties. So if you go to File, Default Document Properties, or if you just go to File, Document Properties, you'll see the properties I'm referring to. In older versions of the software, the user was fully entitled to change any setting in these document properties, and there was nothing the administrator could do to block that. With the 2013 release of 3D Via Composer, you can now block what rights the user has to change their properties. And the way you do this is through the registry. You edit the registry and limit what properties the user can change. Okay, so again, this really only applies to the administrator, pushing 3D Via Composer out to a group of users. He wants to be able to control what access, what properties they have. So like I mentioned, it's through Registry Editor, so I'm going to go ahead and go Start, type Reg Edit, and that brings up the Registry Editor. Now, I'm going to access the HKey local machine key. And the reason we're doing that is I don't want to apply these to a user level. I want to apply these to the entire machine. That way I'm restricting what user level properties are accessible. Okay. So I'm going to HKey local machine. You'll see software, underneath that Dassault Systems, then 3D Via Composer, then a key called Preferences. Now here you can create new keys to limit what permissions you want the user to access. And to show you this a little more clearly, I'd like to again bring up that release notes doc and just show you an example of all the keys that you can create within this string. So there's the string that I can create, and there's the individual bits of data that you can add on the right hand side. So I could go right click new key and then copy in the names for each of the bits of string data that you can add. Okay? And each bit that I add, I'm restricting the user from accessing. So for an example, if I go down here, you'll see I created an HKey local machine, preferences, disable application preference pages, and then for the string data I put in input, hardware support, and advanced, all separated by semicolons. So I'm essentially limiting the user to adjusting anything in the input, hardware support, or advanced aspects of the document properties. Okay? And again, I'm doing this from the local machine key so that it overrides what's in the user key and that the user cannot change those particular settings. So that's it for the 3D Via Composer V6R 2013 release. Please join us at www.ddicad.com.